Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Fishing System in Food Wars World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 221, Yuki's Plan for Neo and Acacia. Yuki. The group was stunned to see Yuki reappear. They didn't know where he had gone, but they knew one thing for certain: cooking God must have been an incredibly difficult task. He's already finished. You really are incredible. The king of all ingredients is spread out in front of you. And you figured out the correct preparation method without even hesitating. Don Slime said, looking at the now prepared god. It was a good thing the inside of the giant shell was completely sealed, with a vast ocean outside. The aroma was contained. Otherwise, the scent of God, even just its remnants, would have attracted countless creatures. God itself was a scavenger dispatched by the earth, its purpose to reclaim the deliciousness scattered across the world. It had to possess the ultimate flavor to attract and absorb those other tastes. It's alright, everyone, don't worry. I was just in a very special space. That space. Yuki proceeded to explain what he had experienced, leaving everyone utterly speechless. I knew cooking God would be difficult, but I never imagined it would be to this extent. To have to cook every ingredient that has ever existed on Earth, from ancient times to the present, it's unbelievable. Setsuno said with a sigh. The actual preparation method was absolutely terrifying, but now she was dying to try it herself. Unfortunately, there wasn't a second portion of God for her to cook. This was just a fragment, so the ingredients inside were limited. When the gourmet solar eclipse comes this time, that will be the real challenge. Yuki said. The most complete and mature God, just thinking about it now made him a little excited. After all, from this fragment of God, he had already seen the benefits of cooking it. Hearing this, everyone was filled with a surge of anticipation. Jiro and the others, however, felt a bit helpless. This was not their area of expertise. Don Slime didn't care about any of that. He had someone send Acacia's full-course menu to a restaurant and had Aceruti wait there. Aceruti was already prepared. For a man with a death wish, no one had any intention of persuading him. I never thought that Aceruti, as one of the leaders of the Blue Grill, would choose to end his life in such a way. Gigi said. Though he had tried his best to understand human emotions, it was still very difficult. In fact, they also had emotions, but their emotions were much more subdued compared to humans. Perhaps it was because of their inherent nature. After all, the Nitro race had no worries about their lifespan. A normal human, even if they lived a long life, would only live a little over 100 years. In a person's life, after a busy life, the people around them would also leave one by one. The brevity of life made humans value emotions even more. Gigi had emotions too, but in his mind, feelings could never affect him to the point of risking his life. So he couldn't wrap his head around Aceruti's decision. Why would someone willingly march to their death just because of some promise from who knows how many years ago? And the many food spirits who had possessed others' bodies, they had clearly been given a second life, but why would they voluntarily give it up? They had abandoned their bodies and chosen to end themselves. All of this left Gigi feeling deeply unsettled. He realized he still didn't understand humans well enough. His eyes could see through a person's entire body, right down to the cellular level. But he couldn't see a person's true thoughts or genuine emotions, because he himself was missing those very things. Perhaps this is what it means to be human. Yuki said with a smile. The reason why the human heart was the most difficult to understand was precisely this. Forget Gigi, even humans themselves couldn't figure out this thing called the human heart. It was completely irreplaceable, not something that could be understood just by being an intelligent life form. After Yuki finished speaking, Gigi was still a bit lost. Aceruti, after eating the ingredients, you have no way back. Even if you regret it now, it's useless. Don Slime said. I know, and I won't regret it. I'm well aware that with my strength and abilities, if I wanted to eat these ingredients, it'd be impossible to get them on my own. Unless someone was willing to share them with me. So, being able to taste something this incredible before I go, that's enough for me. Asaruti said, crying. For him, to have eaten such deliciousness in this life was enough. I know. Then from now on, this body is mine. After Don Slime finished speaking, the gourmet cells began to surge wildly. In the entire Blue Grill, all the cells that Don Slime had split off all gathered here. Asaruti's physical condition wasn't quite up to par. And the ingredient portions were also lacking, but Yuki had given Don Slime some air and another, so these two ingredients compensated for the shortfall. In other words, the current Don Slime, after being revived with these ingredients, would be perfectly fine as long as he didn't engage in violent combat. The revived Don Slime appeared in front of everyone. At this moment, he had returned to his ferocious state. His size had reached dozens of meters. While that wasn't particularly massive by Gourmet World standards, Don Slime's power was absolutely terrifying. If he wanted to, he could casually obliterate the planet beneath his feet while remaining completely immortal. This level of strength had already surpassed the 8 kings. In the original story, he'd only lost to Neo because he didn't have a proper host. Neo wasn't making its debut in the Red Universe either. When Neo first showed up in the Red Universe, Don Slime had killed it outright. And not just once. Unfortunately, the final encounter went the other way. Finally resurrected. Hurry up and bring me something delicious. Don Slime, who hadn't eaten anything with his own mouth for a long time, couldn't wait. Although in others' bodies, he could also taste what they ate, the taste was completely different from eating it himself. So now he was very eager to eat. As for Yuki, he took a moment to mourn Asaruti. The man's devotion was truly admirable. And honestly, his lover had deserved that kind of sacrifice. After all, she'd waited for him at the Snow Church her entire life, and even as she was dying, she'd been praying for him there. Her body was even in a praying state. It was clear how much she loved him. These two were truly devoted to each other. Yuki blessed them. Perhaps in the unseen world of death, these two would be reunited. After Asaruti's situation was resolved, Yuki and Jiro gave the ingredients to Nono and the others, telling them to head back to the human world first and deliver a portion of another to President Ichiryu. As for Yuki and Jiro, they planned to go straight to the 5th continent. The 5th continent, the food region forest. The beasts in this place were the strongest among the 8 continents. As for the food region forest, it was located on the back of the Deer King, Sky Deer. Yuki didn't plan to wait any longer. Now, he and Jiro would secure these ingredients as quickly as possible, then figure out how to handle the pair situation, and finally wait for God to be born. As for Acacia, the Blue Nitro, and the Neo organization, those guys were no longer a threat to Yuki. The strongest member of the Neo organization was just Chua, and Midora was still watching him hungrily. It probably wouldn't be long before Midora went after those guys. So the Neo organization was basically done for. As for the Blue Nitro, while their strength was decent, forget about Jiro. Yuki alone could completely annihilate the entire Blue Nitro faction. If Jiro went after them, it wouldn't even be as much trouble as it was in the original story. With Jiro's current power level, those guys would be obliterated before they could even lay a finger on him. The only real concern was Acacia. The Neo inside him remained a persistent threat. After all, that devouring ability was incredibly dangerous. But Yuki had a way to deal with it. Neo liked to feed on despair, but at the same time, Neo also had something it hated, and that was anger. As long as there was strong enough anger, it could completely scrap Neo's terrifying devouring ability. Without this devouring ability, Neo couldn't stir up any trouble in front of him and Jiro. As for how to make him angry, that might be impossible for others, but for Yuki and Jiro, both knocking masters, it was ridiculously easy. They just needed to use knocking to push the anger to the absolute limit. So Acacia wasn't really that much of a problem. Chapter 222, Starjun Awakened Memories, The Search for Toriko. Just like that, the group split into two teams. One team took the ingredients back to the human world, and Yuki's team went to the fifth continent to capture news. Setsuno and the others returned to the human world by the old road. After returning to the human world, Setsuno directly gave a part of another to Ichiryu. After getting the ingredient, Ichiryu sent the rest to Midora. Another was also captured by you? I have to say, that guy named Yuki is really amazing. For another to be captured, Midora had nothing to say. The difficulty of capturing these ingredients, while he didn't have a precise understanding, just thinking about Frozy's condition back then told him it would be incredibly challenging. Yuki and the others had actually secured two of them in such a short time. That was the most shocking part. And they'd even bypassed Pear entirely. Midora was crystal clear that Acacia's full course menu couldn't be bypassed. But Midora didn't waste any words. After eating another, he also shared some with Starjun and the others. Midora had no interest in recovering forgotten memories whatsoever. The memories he'd lost were all painful ones. Being born just to serve as food. Who would want to remember something like that? So, although Midora had remembered these memories, he had also forcibly made himself forget them again. This kind of memory was useless to keep. But one person was very concerned. After eating another, Starjun suddenly looked at Komatsu. Starjun, what's wrong? Starjun's actions and the change in his aura immediately caught Midora's attention. Ichiryu looked over with some confusion. Starjun didn't know what to say. Should he say this world was very small? As the son of Acacia and Frozy, he had actually been drawn into this organization by Acacia's student. This made him a bit emotional. This world was really too small. At the same time, his inner guilt reached its peak. After all, he had been able to be born smoothly back then because he had absorbed Toriko's nutrients and food luck. As a result, Toriko, because of the lack of nutrients and food luck, had still spent a lot of time before he was born. And because Toriko's food luck was very poor at that time, he had appeared in a war-torn area. At that time, Toriko couldn't eat his fill at all, a world of difference from Starjun. To be born by absorbing everything from Toriko, and yet he had previously captured his own brother's partner. If the dishes Komatsu had made hadn't satisfied Midora, Komatsu would have died here. This was equivalent to him almost killing his own brother's partner. Although he hadn't known before, at this moment. Starjun's guilt had reached its peak. He didn't know how to face Toriko anymore. Ichiryu and Midora were very surprised. The emotion Starjun was showing at this moment was too obvious. It was a kind of guilt, a guilt that had reached its extreme. But why would Starjun feel guilty? And why was he feeling guilty towards Komatsu? Starjun, what did you remember? Tell us. Midora said. He was quite worried about Starjun's situation. After all, Starjun was the last pillar of the Gourmet Corp, and someone he genuinely respected. All right. Because of another, I've remembered things from my past, memories from the moment I was born. My father is Acacia, my mother is Frozy, and my younger brother is Toriko. Starjun laid it all out, and the bombshell silenced the room. Komatsu and Otaki were completely speechless, but even Midora and Ichiryu were caught off guard for a moment. As far as they knew, Frozy and Acacia had never had children. How could this be possible? And for the other one to be Toriko? Ichiryu knew all too well that during the Gourmet Festival, Starjun and Toriko had fought to the death. Starjun had even kidnapped Toriko's partner, Komatsu. The animosity between them was practically at its peak. And now, they were supposed to be brothers? I know it sounds insane, but it's the truth, it's buried deep in my memory. Toriko and I drifted at sea for centuries before we were unsealed. I was born first because I absorbed his nutrients and his food luck. The deepest parts of my memory. I can still recall some of it. Star June recounted what he could remember, Frozy sealing them away, setting them adrift on the ocean. It was a desperate, dangerous move, but she had blessed them with an immense amount of food luck, allowing them to survive their centuries-long journey and be born more than 500 years later. Back then, Frozy couldn't bring herself to tell Acacia about the pregnancy. She knew that he, consumed by his grand ambitions, was willing to sacrifice anything, including his own children. Acacia would never have tolerated a complication like a child interfering with his plans. So Frozy had sent them away. What he was doing might have been for the good of the universe, but for Earth and every living thing on it, it was an unmitigated disaster. So Lady Frozy had children back then. What in the world is Master Acacia planning? To make her so afraid that she wouldn't even allow herself to be revived, to the point of sending her own newborn children away. Ichiryo's brow furrowed. He didn't know the full extent of Acacia's plans, but for Frozy to be that terrified, it meant Acacia was no longer the man he once knew. You still call him master? From what Star June has said, and from all the intel you have, that man is a lost cause. Normally, Midora would have held the utmost respect for his master, but seeing what Acacia had done now, he can only say one thing. Frozy had chosen the wrong man. But food luck was a strange thing. In the end, Star June had been brought to Midora, while Toriko had ended up with Ichiryu. It was all because of food luck. Although Star June had absorbed Toriko's food luck, it would recover over time. That was why Toriko's childhood had been so miserable. But later, he had met Ichiryu, that was because his food luck had recovered to a certain extent. Boss, I want to take Komatsu and find Toriko. Just as Midora finished speaking, Star June spoke up. Toriko was his brother. He couldn't run from what he had done. He had to find him. Star June truly owed Toriko a great deal. At birth, they should have been unsealed at the same time. But because Star June had absorbed Toriko's food luck and nutrients, Toriko's birth had been delayed, and his childhood had been miserable. That was on Star June. Even if he hadn't done it intentionally, the fact remained. And later, when they were capturing ingredients, they had fought several times. He had almost never been at a disadvantage, it was always Toriko who suffered. During the battle at the Gourmet Festival, he had even torn off Toriko's arm and leg. If Toriko's appetite demon hadn't emerged to save him, Toriko would have died at his hands. Even though he had survived, he had still taken his partner. After this series of events, Star June felt as if his world was collapsing. He didn't even know how to face his brother. So now, his only thought was to take Komatsu back to Toriko, to return what he had taken. Even if you want to, that gourmet hunter Toriko has already entered the gourmet world, right? The gourmet world is huge. Where are you going to find him? Otaki couldn't help but point out. From Ichiryu, he had learned that Toriko of the Four Heavenly Kings had already entered the gourmet world and was looking for Komatsu. No one knew where he was now. Finding a single person in this world was incredibly difficult, especially in a place like the gourmet world. If it were the human world, you could find someone quickly by checking specific information. But finding someone in the gourmet world was harder than finding a needle in a haystack. That's not a problem. This little guy's food luck is very strong. We just need to let him lead the way. Ichiryu said with a smile. Komatsu's food luck was second only to Yuki's and one other gourmet hunter in the human world, so his food luck would guide them to Toriko. In the original story, although Toriko had said he had found Komatsu by following his nose, food luck had also played a huge role. So now, all they had to do was let Komatsu lead the way, and Star June could easily find Toriko. At this moment, after learning that Star June was Toriko's brother, Komatsu no longer insisted on waiting here for him. He also hoped the relationship between the two brothers could be reconciled. So, Komatsu immediately agreed to Star June's decision. Chapter 223. Midora's Rage, the raid on Neo. Since you've decided, then let's go. I should probably go and stretch my legs too. Midora looked at Ichiryu. Then I'll go with you. Although with your strength, dealing with Schwa or the Blue Nitro is no problem, there's more than just those two forces behind this. There's someone even more difficult to deal with. As Ichiryu said this, his face became very serious. Acacia, right? That guy's definitely trouble. I have no idea what he's planning anymore. Whatever, let's not overthink it. We need to find Joie first. With that, Midora disappeared on the spot. Ichiryu immediately followed. Otaki, are you going to stay here or come with me? Star June turned his attention to Otaki. Otaki had just broken into the chef rankings when he was captured. Among all the chefs they'd encountered, both his natural talent and technical skills were exceptional. Since Otaki had also awakened his gourmet cells, the Gourmet Corp had decided to keep him around. Truth was, whether you looked at Otaki, Komatsu, or Uemi, all three possessed world-class culinary talent. While Otaki and Nacom weren't quite on Komatsu's level, they weren't far behind either. The difference was that Otaki and Nacom had lacked the right opportunities to shine. For Otaki, that opportunity came through the Gourmet Corp. For Nacom, it was NEO. Despite being essentially prisoners, both chefs found their skills improving rapidly in these harsh environments. So while being captured by the Gourmet Corp and NEO was obviously terrible, it had also forced them to unlock their true potential. I'll go with you. There's no point in staying here. The boss has left, and you're planning to leave too. The Gourmet Corp is only left with a few people. This organization is finished, isn't it? Otaki said. Although his words were not pleasant to hear, they were the truth. Star June also knew that the Gourmet Corp was now supported by him and Midora. If they both didn't care, the Gourmet Corp would be finished. Otaki naturally wouldn't stay in this place, so a few of them packed their things and left. After leaving, Star June had Komatsu lead the way, heading in the direction he pointed. As for whether they would go wrong, Star June didn't even consider this possibility. His own boss and Ichiryu had both said that Komatsu had an overpowered food luck, so believing in Komatsu was enough. Just like that, under Komatsu's guidance, the group found Toriko in less than a day. That's right, less than a day. Their pace wasn't actually that fast after all. In a place like the gourmet world, they couldn't afford to be reckless. While they knew food luck was incredibly useful, it wasn't a cure-all. But since Toriko had already reached the edge of gourmet world territory, it only took the three of them less than a day to track him down. Toriko San. Seeing Toriko, Komatsu's eyes immediately lit up, and he shouted. Hearing this voice, Toriko also suddenly looked up and then saw Star June, Komatsu, and Otaki. Komatsu! The moment he saw Komatsu, Toriko was absolutely thrilled. Even though he knew Komatsu would be fine, he'd been getting worried after searching for him for so long without any luck. Now that he saw Komatsu was safe and sound, Toriko breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing this, Star June also immediately controlled his mount to land, stopping in front of Toriko. Star June. However, the moment Toriko spotted Star June, his eyes blazed with anger, hatred, and fierce determination. He'd lost to Star June before, which had led to Komatsu being taken away. Toriko had sworn that would never happen again, so seeing Star June now ignited his fighting spirit like a wildfire. Wait, Toriko, I'm not here to fight you. I was planning to bring Komatsu back to you. Star June naturally couldn't fight his own brother, so seeing this, he immediately stopped him. Toriko-san, Mr. Star June doesn't mean any harm. Please calm down first. Seeing the tension, Komatsu quickly spoke up. Star June's words had no effect, but Komatsu's words were different. Komatsu, what's going on? Hearing Komatsu's words, Toriko was stunned for a moment and then asked with great surprise. It's like this. Seeing that Toriko had retracted his aura, Komatsu also breathed a sigh of relief and immediately told him what had happened when Star June had brought him to the Gourmet Corp. But when he got to the end, Toriko was completely baffled. Wait. Toriko pointed at Star June with a look of complete disbelief. He didn't know his own background. Growing up in a war zone like that, he had no idea who his family even was. They'd probably died years ago. Now, to be told that Star June was his brother, Toriko couldn't accept it. After all, Starjun had been part of the Gourmet Corp. He'd fought Toriko to the death and even stolen his partner. After everything, Starjun had somehow ended up as his brother. Toriko insisted he couldn't accept that. Unbelievable as it sounds, it's the truth. After eating another, I recovered fragments of my past. I'm a little older than you, so back then you had no memory of it. Even if you ate another, it wouldn't help. But I know for certain you are my brother. Our parents are Acacia and Frozy. That's right, the gourmet god and the god of cooking you remember. Starjun didn't care if Toriko believed him or not, and continued to throw out some bombshells. These bombshells exploded in front of Toriko, directly making him dizzy. Give me some time. I need to calm down. Toriko said his head was now spinning. If he had a choice, he would never acknowledge Starjun as his brother. But that wasn't even the biggest issue. The real shock was that both he and Starjun were sons of Acacia and Frozy. That was the most absurd part of all. After a long, heavy silence, Toriko finally seemed to process the impossible truth. All right, I believe you, Toriko said, his voice tight. But Starjun, even if we're brothers, I'm not letting you off for what you did in the past. What did brotherhood matter in the face of betrayal? The animosity between them was still raw. Starjun had taken Komatsu right in front of him. As for the beatdown that had left him missing an arm and a leg, Toriko couldn't have cared less. That was just a fight. But Komatsu was different. Toriko valued his partner more than his own life. He could forgive Starjun for what he'd done to him. After all, Starjun hadn't known the truth. But what he'd done to Komatsu, that was a debt that wouldn't be paid so easily. In the original story, by the time Toriko and Starjun reunited on the sixth continent, their relationship had softened, hatred giving way to a tense, unspoken understanding. But here, things were different. Toriko had only just gotten Komatsu back. The wound was still raw. And Starjun didn't yet have the strength to return the food luck he had stolen. I know. Starjun understood completely. The past couldn't be erased with a few words and a claim of kinship. For now, the fact that Toriko even acknowledged him as a brother was enough. While Toriko and Starjun began the slow, arduous process of reconciliation, Ichirio and Midora had already arrived at Neo's headquarters. With the intelligence provided by Kuribo, finding the base had been simple. The members of Neo were still holed up in their unfinished spaceship. A vessel built with nitro technology, fully capable of interstellar travel. Joie might have been deceiving everyone else, but he wasn't about to gamble with his own life. He had poured every resource into the ship's construction. But now, Ichirio and Midora were here. There are quite a few of them, but almost all are being controlled. Only a handful are here of their own free will. Ichirio glanced at Midora. The ones who weren't puppets, aside from the wealthy patrons and kings, were almost all from Midora's side. Midora said nothing. As the head of the Gourmet Corp, he knew exactly what kind of people he had recruited. 9 out of 10 were self-serving opportunists. Those were the ones who thrived in the Gourmet Corporation. If they had any decency or real skill, they would have joined the IGO. Why bother with his organization? So, Midora wasn't surprised in the slightest. He had no intention of sparing these traitors. He might not have managed the day-to-day affairs, but the Gourmet Corp was still his creation. It wasn't a playground for any stray dog to come and piss on. Speaking of which, they really are building a spaceship. A pity it's not going to survive this. Ichirio looked at the ship with a hint of regret. The technology was impressive, it could have advanced the human world's tech level by several degrees. But he had no intention of backing down. A fight here was inevitable. At their level of power, once it started, the ship would be reduced to splinters. And with everyone hiding inside, the only way to flush them out was to sink their vessel. Of course, Midora also noticed a few familiar faces: Mohayan Sheishai, Tepe, Kuribo, and Nakam. Not everyone was a puppet, and not everyone had joined Neo willingly. Some of them needed to be saved. I'll handle the people inside the ship. You take care of Joie. Ichiryu knew Midoriya's personality. The man was a force of nature, and unless someone was directly connected to him, he couldn't care less about their fate. Midoriya didn't object. He was only interested in Joie. As long as he took him down, everything else was secondary. And so, Midoriya locked onto Joie's presence within the ship. By now, Joie had completely replenished the life orbs in his hair. While they were useless against a powerhouse like Jiro, he had learned his lesson. He had relied on them to stall for time, to wait for Midoriya's attack to create a diversion so he could escape. They were still useful. So, upon returning to Neo, he had prepared a massive supply. The life orbs now dangled from his hair in thick clusters, almost completely covering his head. It was a strange, almost comical sight, but Joie couldn't care less about his appearance. Jiro had scared the life out of him. He knew Acacia's students were strong, but he never imagined they would be that strong. Frozy's body, even with its fused appetite demon, was no match for them. And they hadn't even eaten many Acacia's ingredients yet. If they consumed all 8 of Acacia's full course menu, he couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful they would become. Just as Joie was single-mindedly crafting more life orbs, a terrifying presence erupted. A devastating attack ripped his spaceship in two, exposing him at its very core. Chapter 224, Joie's Severed Escape Route, the Eaten Appetite Demon. What's happening? Joie was still reeling, completely baffled, but his confusion quickly turned to rage. This spaceship was his only hope of survival. Whether Acacia ended up eating the Earth or it simply exploded upon maturity, the planet was doomed. He couldn't stay here. This ship was his lifeline. He had spent so much time and resources on it, and it was nearly complete. But now, his escape route had been cut off. Joie was furious. But when he saw who had attacked, his heart went cold. Standing before him was none other than Midoriya. It really is Frozy's body. You absolutely deserve to die. Before coming here, Midoriya had held on to a sliver of hope that the person before him was just an imposter, someone disguised as Frozy. But seeing him in person, Midoriya knew it was true. The presence was too familiar. This was Frozy's body. And the thing in front of him definitely wasn't her. So now, all that was left for Midoriya was pure, unadulterated rage. Seeing Midoriya, Joie was on the verge of a complete breakdown. If he hadn't been pushed to the brink by Jiro before, he wouldn't have been so panicked. He might have even tried to fight. But he had already faced Jiro and had nearly been killed. Only Midoriya's attack back then had inadvertently saved his life. In this situation, Joie wasn't stupid, he wouldn't face Midoriya in direct combat. But he couldn't figure out how Midoriya had tracked him down. At this moment, Joie still didn't grasp the severity of his situation. He had no idea that Midoriya truly saw Frozy as his own mother. Now that her body had been stolen, what was the difference between that and killing his own mother? So, Midoriya's rage was completely justified. What happened? Why was the ship torn apart? At that moment, all the powerhouses on the ship came rushing out. They knew what was at stake for Earth, so this ship was their only hope. Now that their lifeline was in danger, they were naturally panicking. Boss! The Gourmet Corp members nearly jumped out of their skin when they spotted Midoriya. Everyone who joined the organization was ruthless, but they'd all been crushed by him before. This just proved how absolutely terrifying they knew Midoriya was. Now that he was standing right here. It would have been weird if they weren't losing their minds. Just as everyone was in shock, a figure flashed by, and a group of people were pulled out. When they saw who had pulled them out, they were stunned. It was the IGO's president, Ichiryu. Seeing Ichiryu, Joie immediately activated his appetite demon. This was no time for thinking. He didn't want to know why Midoriya and Ichiryu were here. Jiro had already pushed him to the brink. Now, his only option was to run. But the moment the appetite demon appeared, Midoriya's tongue shot out like a venomous snake, instantly piercing through it. With a flick, Midora directly swallowed Joie's appetite demon. Midora's tongue was one of his primary weapons. You could say his strongest weapon was his tongue spear. While his fighting style was a bit disgusting, you had to admit his tongue spear was incredibly powerful. In the original story, his tongue spear had almost whipped the earth to pieces. Seeing his appetite demon eaten, a cold sweat broke out on Joie's forehead. But he still had other trump cards, like the golden can. Though the chances of sealing Midora were slim, and there was still an Ichiryu watching from the side. Joie didn't want to do nothing. So he decided to use the can, to try and entangle Midora for a while, so he could seal him. And he had a question: why were these two here? It could only be said that Joie still underestimated Frozy's importance in their hearts. The food spirits that returned from the world of souls could possess others' bodies, but they couldn't possess their memories. So, Joie had no idea how serious the situation was. "President, you're finally here." Seeing his president, Kuriboh smiled with relief. Working undercover in this place was incredibly dangerous. Even with his considerable strength, going up against a whole group of powerhouses and someone like Joie had him seriously worried. But now that Ichiryu had appeared, it was clear that they were planning to make a move on Joie. Kuriboh's danger was naturally gone. "You've worked hard, Kuriboh, for infiltrating such a dangerous place to send us intelligence," Ichiryu said. He meant every word. Given how incredibly dangerous this area was, the fact that Kuriboh had managed to reach them and relay information was nothing short of remarkable. "It's what I should do, President." After Kuriboh finished speaking, he stood behind Ichiryu. "And you, Teppei, you can stop pretending. I can see you're not being controlled." With that, Ichiryu looked at Teppei. Teppei, who had been wearing a dazed expression, returned to normal. "As expected, in front of a powerhouse like you, there's no way to disguise myself." Teppei scratched his head. He really hadn't expected that Kuriboh was an undercover agent sent by Ichiryu. Joie's face turned black. While he'd suspected there might be issues when these people joined up, he figured that once they reached the gourmet world, they'd be safe. People from the human world couldn't possibly follow them here. But he never imagined there was actually a real undercover agent among them and that they'd actually been tracked down. The truth was, Joie's confidence had always been based on his intelligence network. He knew full well that Earth was doomed to explode. Whether he was lying or telling the truth, others would be able to tell for themselves. He was betting on honesty. After learning about Earth's inevitable destruction, he felt that everyone would choose to stand on his side. After all, he offered them a way to survive. But Joie had overlooked human nature. Many times, human nature was indeed negative, but there were also positive aspects. Not everyone was afraid of death. Kuriboh was like that. He also had people he cared about, so for him, it wasn't about running away, but about how to solve this problem. Ichiryu and the others were the same. So now, everyone had come here. "What do you all want? While I did cause some trouble in the human world, it's not worth the two of you making a trip, is it?" Joie couldn't help but speak up first. "The affairs of the human world? That's something that old man should be concerned with. Joie, you shouldn't have used Frozy's body to revive." Midora couldn't care less about the world. After all, his single meteor spice attack, driven by malice, had already devastated the human world's environment. To Midora, it made no difference if the human world was wiped out completely. What he truly cared about was Frozy. It's because of Frozy's body. Joie suddenly thought of Jiro. When Jiro had first met him, there had been no change. But after learning that he had used Frozy's body to revive, Jiro had gone berserk. That emotion was something Joie couldn't understand. Joie knew he was in deep trouble. Finding Frozy's body had seemed like the ultimate score at the time, but now, he realized it was nothing but a bottomless pit of despair. If he'd revived in someone else's body, he might not have been as strong, and he'd probably need to switch bodies again down the line. But at least he would have lived longer than this. Now he was being stared down by several absolutely terrifying powerhouses. Joie was filled with regret. Just as Joie was reeling, the tongue spear lashed out again. Midora no longer needed to observe Joie's food luck, it had already been completely depleted. So, if he wanted to copy food luck, he would have to find someone else. In their first encounter in the original story, Midora hadn't gone all out because he needed to copy that food luck. And because he knew how special it was, he had been extra careful in his observation. But because he had been too focused on observing, he hadn't really tried to deal with Joie, which had given him an opening. Now, there were no more openings to be had. With a strength that could crush Joie, the tongue spear instantly tore off one of his arms. The next second, Midora's tongue spear shot up into the sky and then slammed down, instantly obliterating the severed arm. Midora would not allow Frozy's body to be possessed by someone else. So, it was better to destroy it directly. You monster! Joie clutched his severed arm. He could regenerate it, but Midora's attack had made one thing crystal clear: he was completely outmatched. If they actually fought, he'd end up dead. Do you know what my full course menu is, Joie? Because of you, there's no way I can complete it now. Midora said, his face a mask of calm fury. Because of me? How the hell is this my fault? What does it have to do with me if you can't track down the ingredients for your own full course menu? Joie was completely baffled. He felt this was a huge accusation. A full course menu was something a person decided on their own. Although he had caused trouble, he had never driven any ingredient to extinction. Chapter 225, Midora's Full Course Menu, The Arrival of the Blue Nitro, The Deer King. Gourmet Corp President's Full Course Menu? Hearing this, Ichiria's group was filled with confusion. At this moment, the people who had been controlled had all been knocked out by Ichiryu. He would save them after they returned to the human world. As for those who hadn't been controlled, Ichiriya couldn't care less about their lives. Midora's full course menu is very special. And because of Joie, that full course menu will never exist again. Ichiriya couldn't help but shake his head sadly. Midora had never talked about his full course menu with anyone, but Frozy had known. Curious, they'd asked her about it. Frozy hadn't kept it secret from them. Because to her, Midora's full course menu represented a child's desperate need for his mother's love. Midora hadn't shared it with anyone else because he thought he'd outgrown such feelings. Admitting to something like that would have been too embarrassing, so he'd only confided in Frozy. Because of you, I can't find it anymore. Do you know? My full course menu. The hors d'oeuvre is meeting Frozy, the soup is Frozy's charity, the fish dish is the warmth of having a family for the first time, the meat dish is the touch left on my forehead, a goodnight kiss, the main course is Frozy's smile, the salad is Frozy's encouragement, the dessert is Frozy's teaching, and the drink is Frozy's dream, to eat with her family. Everything was because of Frozy. But because of you, this full course menu can never be completed. Hundreds of years of hunger. And Midora's anger finally erupted through his words. You sick freak who's obsessed with your teacher's wife. Midora's full course menu did sound strange. It felt as if he had a crush on Frozy. But that was from an adult's perspective. For an adult's full course menu to be like this was quite strange. Midora was a boy when he had met Frozy and the others. But he was a boy without a childhood. So, after receiving this motherly love, he had treated himself as a child. Frozy had clearly discovered this. So, after learning of this full course menu, she had only treated him better and hadn't thought he was a pervert. There's such a full course menu? Is he feeding on emotions? Everyone was very shocked after hearing Midora's full course menu. You don't understand Midora's past. The human world hundreds of years ago was nothing like today. Sure, you can learn some history from books, but the really dark stuff never made it into the records. Midora was born to be pig feed. But because he had gourmet cells from birth, the pigs wouldn't eat him and he survived. For Midora, family was a luxury. Until he met us. Frozy's care for him was meticulous from the very first moment. We did eventually treat Midora like family, but that was only after he'd been with us for some time. Once we learned about his background, we started treating him as one of our own. Ichiriya said. Even he couldn't just treat a stranger as family. But Frozy had done it. The first time she saw Midora, she had seen through his essence. Because he had no family and had never experienced a mother's love, he had immediately treated Frozy as his own mother. His full-course menu might seem strange, but think about it carefully. If a child of a few years old said such a full-course menu, would you still find it strange? Ichiriya said. Hearing this, everyone imagined it and realized that if it were a child, they would only think that this child loved his mother very much. But at that time, Midora's mentality was that of a child. I see. The human world hundreds of years ago was really. It's a good thing this era has the IGO, so it won't become like that. Teppei was very helpless. He had heard from Jiro and the others about what it was like 500 years ago. Now, after hearing Midora's experience, he had a clearer understanding of the darkness of that era. He was very glad that he could live in such an era. Although this era also seemed to have problems, those were things that powerhouses like them needed to consider. The human world wasn't in great shape right now, but with Ichiriya's recent directives, life would soon return to normal and even improve beyond that. At the same time, some disturbances rippled through the area. Soon, several figures appeared on the horizon. These figures were the Blue Nitro who had come here through the back channel. The moment Midora's aura had erupted, the Emperor's ring had appeared. The appearance of the Emperor's ring, plus Midora's and Joie's auras, had naturally attracted the powerhouses. Yuki and Jiro, who were on their way to the food region forest, had also sensed this aura at the first moment. Midora's aura and Joie's aura, it seems Midora is planning to make a move. Jiro was very clear that once Midora knew the specific situation, he definitely wouldn't let Joie go. But he hadn't expected Midora to make a move now. But in Jiro's view, this wasn't a big deal. After all, with Midora against Joie, it was simply too easy. Joie's strength, he knew very well. Do you need to go and see, Jiro? Yuki asked. If Midora made a move, then Joie was destined to be finished. I'm not going. I've already seen it before. It's better not to stimulate an old man's heart with such a scene. Jiro said with a smile. 500 years ago, they had already sent Frozy off. To send her off once was enough. So he didn't plan to go and watch their battle. In that case, let's go and have a good chat with the Deer King. Yuki had no intention of getting involved with Joie's situation either. Joie meant nothing to him. It would be perfect if Midora killed him. Even if Midora didn't finish the job, Yuki would step in. And eventually, Acacia would make his move too. Sure, Acacia wasn't a good guy, but he was someone who could sacrifice everything for his goals. He could abandon Frozy, but that didn't mean others could defile her even if she was just a corpse now. So Acacia would come for Joie as well. You could say that the moment Joie possessed Frozy's body, his fate was sealed. It just took hundreds of years for that fate to catch up with him. No longer concerned with the Midora and Joie situation, he could tell from the energy signatures what was happening anyway. The outcome was obvious. So Yuki and Jiro headed straight for the Deer King. On the other side, the Blue Nitro, at their dining planet, had also felt these two auras. That's Joie's aura, and the other one is Midora. He's actually targeting Joie. What do we do now? Several Blue Nitro exchanged glances. Their upcoming plans still required Joie. Well, not strictly necessary, every Blue Nitro was an exceptionally skilled chef capable of preparing God themselves. But keeping Joie alive would definitely be the better option. Go find Joie, find a way to keep him. This guy has to participate in the subsequent plan. The Blue Nitro quickly reached a decision, so a group of them immediately headed to where the massive battle had broken out. But when they arrived, they discovered things weren't as straightforward as they'd expected. What the hell is happening? Why is Midora so incredibly powerful? With strength like that, even if we all attacked together, we wouldn't stand a chance. Watching the rampaging Midora, the Blue Nitro hesitated. They'd originally planned to rescue Joie, but seeing Medora's rampage, it seemed like Joie was expendable after all. The main issue was that Medora's explosive power was absolutely staggering. And there was Echeria standing right beside him. While the Blue Nitro were incredibly strong, in one-on-one combat they couldn't match the 8 Kings. But Acacia's students could crush any single 8 King effortlessly. This was an absolute strength gap. Joie had managed to survive until their arrival only because of the beads covering his head. So even though Medora kept killing him over and over, as long as those beads weren't depleted, Joie wouldn't stay dead. At this moment, Joie was also very anxious. He hoped the Blue Nitro and even Acacia could come and help him. But now, the more he waited, the colder his heart became. Something was definitely off about the situation. With Blue Nitro and Acacia's power, they must have detected his presence ages ago. If they were coming, they'd be here by now. Unless they simply refused to show themselves. At that thought, Joie's heart sank. Screw it. Worst case scenario, I die. As long as my soul survives, I can always come back eventually. In the end, Joie had completely given up fighting back. He knew he wouldn't truly die, his soul would just return to the world of souls. So Joie stopped resisting and let Medora finish him off. But just as Joie died and his soul was about to enter the world of souls, a massive figure suddenly materialized beside him. Don't think about being revived again. It was Dawn Slime. Dawn Slime's cellular structure was incredibly unique. Normally, once a food spirit died, it couldn't be killed again. But Dawn Slime was different. He possessed an extremely rare ability: his cells could devour and break down anything. This included food spirits. The reason why the food spirits in the world of souls were so afraid of Dawn Slime was precisely this. Joie's soul faced the same fate now. Echeria had planned for this possibility. After all, Joie was someone who'd escaped from the world of souls. It made sense that he'd return there after being killed. But Echeria wasn't about to let Joie slip away again, so he'd sent Dawn Slime to handle the situation. Chapter 226, The Deer King, Entering the Food Region Forest. With a final, decisive move from Dawn Slime, Joie's soul was utterly obliterated, unable to even begin its retreat to the world of souls. Just like that, the man known as Joie ceased to exist. Frozie's body dissipated in the aftermath of the battle, but her knife, Cinderella, remained. Medora didn't destroy it. Instead, he tossed it to Echiryu. This knife belonged to Frozie. Starjun and Toriko are her sons. It should go to them. With his inner demons finally exorcised, Medora seemed much more at ease, his actions no longer so extreme. He had no intention of destroying Cinderella, choosing instead to entrust it to Toriko and Starjun. It was, after all, the only thing Frozie had left in this world. Giving a mother's last memento to her sons was the only right thing to do. I'll make sure they get it. Those Blue Nitro were surprisingly rational, they didn't even try to intervene. Or I wouldn't have minded taking them on right here. Echiryu caught Cinderella and glanced in the direction where the Blue Nitro had been hiding. After seeing Joie's demise, they had immediately beat a hasty retreat. Now that Joie is dealt with, we don't have to hold back the next time we run into those Blue Nitro. Medora knew why Echiryu hadn't engaged them. A full-scale mobilization of the Blue Nitro was a force to be reckoned with. While individually they were no match for an 8 King, together, they were formidable. He had been preoccupied with Joie, and Dawn Slime had already emerged from Echiryu's body. Under those circumstances, it wouldn't have been wise for Echiryu to take them on alone. And who knew what other tricks the Blue Nitro had up their sleeves? They weren't the Red Nitro of this universe, their methods were bound to be more numerous and cunning. So, a little caution was warranted. Let's wait until Yuki and the others have gathered enough ingredients before we make a move. With that, Echiryu left, returning to the IGO headquarters in the human world. As for Medora, he had also come to a decision. He rounded up the remaining members of the Gourmet Corp and brought them back to the human world as well. The Gourmet Corp was finished. Those who were brought back and had clean records were absorbed into the IGO. The rest, the ones with blood on their hands. got thrown in prison. These criminals could no longer be sent to the Food Honor Temple. The temple had been caught in Midoriya's attack zone. Even though the meteorites were stopped, the bubble fruit had been destroyed in the process. The other ingredients were all gone. Even the Food Honor Temple itself had died. Both the Food Honor Temple and the disappearing cuisine restaurant had been built with special materials. Even after being constructed, the materials had not died. But under the assault of Midoriya's malice, these buildings naturally couldn't survive. So, what's the plan now? The situation seems to have changed. Midoriya's strength is beyond our imagination. Ichiryu may have lost to Midoriya, but that was only because he allowed it. And now the Dawn Slime has been revived, plus with Jiro. The Blue Nitro had returned to their own territory. After a discussion, they suddenly realized they were now at an absolute disadvantage. None of Acacia's students were people they could afford to mess with anymore. Even weakened, Ichiryu was still stronger than any of them one-on-one. And with a revived Dawn Slime backing him up, he was practically untouchable. As for Jiro and Midoriya, they were completely out of their league. The Blue Nitro found themselves in an incredibly vulnerable position. We're no match for them now. Even if all of us attacked at once, we wouldn't gain any advantage. And if we can't take them down quickly, the others will react. Once those three team up, we won't even have to fight. One of the Blue Nitros said with a sigh of resignation. It was a complete dead end. Then let's have Acacia handle it. I know he's at a crucial stage right now, but if we can't take these guys out, the whole plan falls apart. We might as well deploy him. One of the Blue Nitro suggested. Things had reached a breaking point, they couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. Having Acacia step in was their only real option left. Is it really a good idea to have him act? He doesn't distinguish between friend and foe when he fights. We've suffered at his hands before. His mind seems to have been affected by Neo, he's not entirely lucid. Another Blue Nitro shook his head. The risk of having Acacia act was too great. He might even attack them first. I'll go and talk to Acacia. But not now. I'll tell him when we get closer to the gourmet solar eclipse. For now, what we need to do is not cause any trouble. As for what those guys are doing, as long as it doesn't involve us, let's not interfere. Pear spoke up. He knew exactly what Acacia's real plan was, after all, he'd helped design it. He also knew Acacia wasn't actually affected by anything. The guy was just putting on an act. Without that performance, no one would get truly enraged. And they needed that rage. Only sufficiently intense fury could force Neo to release every creature trapped inside it. Then it's decided. Pear, this matter is in your hands. For the next period of time, everyone, don't go out. Try to avoid any conflict with these guys. In the end, the Blue Nitro reached their decision. They would all lay low. Some Blue Nitro had actually considered hoarding ingredients beforehand. If they could cut off the supply, these powerhouses wouldn't be able to get any stronger. But the idea was quickly shut down. The logic was simple, pulling a stunt like that would paint a massive target on their backs. Originally, these powerhouses were busy collecting ingredients and had no time to bother with them. But if they brought trouble upon themselves and attracted their attention, when these people came knocking, they wouldn't be able to stop them. So, the best way was to do nothing. Everything would wait until the gourmet solar eclipse. At that time, they would let Acacia make a move. Acacia's body contained Neo, and Neo had the ability to devour everything. So, they weren't worried about whether Acacia was a match for these powerhouses. They had absolute confidence in Neo. Just like that, the Blue Nitro became even more low-key, all of them turning into shut-ins, not daring to leave their own base. On the other side, Yuki and Jiro had already arrived at the 5th continent. As soon as they arrived, Yuki sensed that the surface strength of the 5th continent was arguably the weakest of the 8 continents. The beasts roaming the 5th continent's surface almost never had capture levels in the 4 digits. In the gourmet world, anything over 1,000 was basically high-level cannon fodder. But here, very few creatures could even reach that threshold. Of course, this was only what you'd find on the surface. The fifth continent's true strength actually made it the most dangerous place in the entire gourmet world. The reason was because of the deer king. The deer king species was the sky deer, and its body length reached over 60 kilometers. This size might not seem very large, but on the deer king's back was a place called the Food Region Forest. This place was the true fifth continent. According to Jiro, the size of the Food Region Forest was no smaller than the fifth continent. And living within it were the true beasts of the fifth continent. The powerful beasts all lived within it. Any beast below level 1000 couldn't even set foot in the Food Region Forest. Since all the high-level creatures had migrated there, the outside world was left relatively peaceful. The fifth continent's ecosystem had actually improved because of it. So, countless low-level beasts appeared in the outside world. Of course, this low level was in comparison to the overall strength of the gourmet world. If compared to the human world, this place was horrifying. Yuki and Jiro didn't linger. The surface of the fifth continent had nothing worthwhile. For quality ingredients, you still had to venture into the Food Region Forest. The meat dish from Jiro's full-course menu had been hunted in that very forest. Its capture level was over 4,000, strong enough to rival the 7 beasts of the sixth continent. Chapter 227, Meat Dish News, Unlocking the Back Channel. The two headed out to locate the Deer King. After all, the entire Food Region Forest existed on its back. They needed permission because of their overwhelming power, with strength matching or exceeding the 8 kings. Protocol demanded they announce their presence. The Deer King could devastate the entire Food Region Forest if provoked. In the original timeline, Acacia had forced his way through, but only because of his incredible power. Jiro could pull off the same feat, but a deathmatch with the Deer King was pointless. They were here for ingredients, not to challenge the Deer King. Although the Deer King was also a good ingredient, it couldn't compare to Acacia's full-course menu. According to Jiro, the Deer King permitted strong hunters in the forest, but with strict rules against excessive killing or wanton destruction. Cross those lines, and you'd face its wrath. The Deer King might be the most level-headed of the 8 kings, but that wasn't saying much. Better not to test its patience. While he could handle an enraged Deer King, avoiding unnecessary complications was the smart play. Once they reached the Deer King, both men unleashed their full auras without restraint. The moment their power flared, the Deer King's attention snapped to them. Their combined presence was absolutely overwhelming. One was very unfamiliar, and the other was very familiar. Jiro had visited the Food Region Forest multiple times. His signature was well known to the Deer King. "Deer King, we want to enter the Food Region Forest." Jiro didn't waste any words and just said it directly to the Deer King. To this, the Deer King just nodded its head. While Yuki was a stranger, Jiro was a familiar face. The Deer King trusted that Jiro knew the rules, so it dismissed them without further concern. As long as they didn't massacre everything in sight, they were free to hunt. This world revolved around ingredients. Food only had value when consumed, so the Deer King rarely interfered with hunters. Of course, if they pulled something like the Gourmet Corpse rampage in the human world, the Deer King would obliterate them without hesitation. After greeting him, Jiro took Yuki directly into the Food Region Forest. Entering here was completely different from the outside world. The vastness of the beast auras here was the strongest Yuki had ever felt. Pretty impressive, right? "These creatures are no joke," Jiro said with a grin. "Absolutely. The beasts here are on a completely different level from the outside world. The fifth continent really lives up to its reputation as the strongest region in the gourmet world. But let's track down news first." Yuki replied. "There's no need to look for that thing. I know where it's nurtured. And besides us humans and the Nitro race, no beast would go and eat that thing." Jiro explained. He'd known News's location for ages, but the ingredient had one major flaw: it was completely tasteless. Without eating another first to unlock enhanced taste perception, news had zero flavor. The local beasts couldn't care less about it. They had no clue how to properly prepare an ingredient like news anyway. The IGO had mapped news's location years ago. They just hadn't harvested it because it wasn't ripe yet. By now, it should be ready. Following Jiro's lead, they headed toward news's location, encountering numerous beasts along the way. These creatures ranked among the most delicious on the entire fifth continent. Their appearance wasn't coincidental. Yuki's food luck was drawing them in, essentially delivering gourmet meals directly to him. Naturally, Yuki didn't refuse such gifts. Just like that. They gathered various ingredients as they traveled, eventually reaching News's location. News was meat, but it grew on a tree like a fruit. This tree was rooted in the food region forest. The tree absorbed the earth's essence through the food region forest, then produced news on the Deer King's back. See? Simple enough. Did you hear its voice? Jiro asked with a smile. Finding news had been surprisingly easy. The few beasts they'd encountered along the way practically threw themselves at them. They were having a much smoother time than Zebra's crew had. When those guys arrived, they'd been swarmed by endless waves of hostile creatures. If Acacia's cells hadn't drawn all the creatures away later on, Zebra and the others would have been torn to shreds. I heard it. Yuki explained. To prepare this ingredient, you need to work from the inside out. News has a surface covered in microscopic pores. Completely invisible without magnification. For proper preparation, you have to channel your power through those tiny openings and cook it from within. Try any other method, and you'll ruin it completely. Cooking from the inside? And through pores that small? That's not going to be easy. Jiro remarked. Never mind the cooking process itself, just injecting power into it was a massive challenge. It's all the same to me. Yuki had already mastered both Another and God. While God hadn't been complete, handling news was well within his capabilities. He directed his voice straight into the ingredient. Now he understood why Gigi had sent Zebra and the others to this place. Zebra's sound waves could pierce through anything, just like Branch's lightning. Those abilities were tailor-made for preparing news. Sound happened to be one of Yuki's skills too, though he seldom relied on it. He didn't need to. He had other ways of perceiving his surroundings without relying on sound. Using echolocation to map an area could easily give away his position to an opponent, so he generally avoided it. But now, it was the perfect tool for the job. Yuki compressed his voice and injected it deep inside news. The preparation turned out to be deceptively simple. Harvesting it meant cutting the internal connections that anchored it to the tree. The trick was that you could only access them from within. With thousands of incredibly delicate connections to sever, it was like performing microsurgery on an enormous scale. A single mistake, the slightest misapplication of force, would ruin the entire ingredient. The preparation would be a failure. It didn't take long for Yuki to sever all the connections. The next moment, the enormous mass of meat detached from the tree. Yuki carved it up and stored it in his personal space. Of course, he left 2 small pieces out for them to eat immediately. Consuming news grants access to the back channel, allowing one to travel to other continents through the world of souls. You could access the world of souls from anywhere, provided you had the right ability. Consuming news granted exactly that power, not only enabling travel through the world of souls but also creating a small personal pocket dimension. The Tenshell 5 called it a mobile kitchen. After consuming news, both of their power levels skyrocketed again, and they could now open pathways to the back channel whenever they wanted. By entering the back channel and exiting elsewhere, they could achieve an effect similar to teleportation. With this ability, capturing the other ingredients and returning to the human world will be much more convenient. Jiro said. Yuki couldn't agree more. With that settled, the two of them headed straight back to the human world. They regrouped with Setsuno and the others, and Yuki immediately handed out the ingredient. That's 3 ingredients down. 5 more to go. The others, having also consumed news, were stunned. In such a short time frame, Yuki had already secured 3 legendary ingredients. With only 5 left to go, anything seemed possible. For the remaining 5, the 4th continent isn't a concern, the flower fields have been restored. The 3rd continent has ingredients everywhere, though detoxification remains a challenge. As for God, we'll still have to wait. Center is located in Area 0. To get inside, we'll have to fight the Dragon King Diraus. Yuki considered their options. And there's still Pear from the Monkey King. We skipped it, but we still have to capture it. Jiro reminded him. I know. My thinking is, why don't we secure Pear first? Whether we actually consume it or not, that's a bridge we can cross later. Yuki hadn't forgotten about Pear, but its strange properties made him feel powerless to decide. Regardless of what they'd do with it, they needed to obtain it first. Capturing Pear is a nightmare. Most of the other ingredients can be obtained without directly confronting the 8 kings, but this one's unavoidable. The damn thing is literally growing on the Monkey King's body. Setsuno laid out the harsh reality. Never mind how difficult the other ingredients were to prepare. When it came to actually getting them, Pear was hands down the most dangerous. That's not something we need to worry about. If I remember correctly, the Monkey King is the last of its kind, right? Yuki said suddenly. That's right. The Monkey King has no offspring, it's the last of its kind. Are you suggesting? Setsuno suddenly caught on to what he was implying, staring at him in shock. Exactly. Pear wasn't originally part of the Monkey King species. It was that greedy old Monkey King who devoured all of it, causing it to parasitize his entire race. Now, the current Monkey King is the sole survivor. If we eliminate him, Pear will naturally return to the earth. Then we won't need to worry about preparation at all, we can harvest it directly. Yuki explained. Originally, Pear required no cooking whatsoever. As long as you could survive the 7th continent, obtaining it was straightforward. But the previous Monkey King's gluttony had caused the ingredient to bond with his species, making both capture and preparation exponentially more difficult. Take out the Monkey King? Is that a good idea? He's one of the 8 kings. Granny Ayam was flabbergasted. She couldn't wrap her head around the idea of assassinating one of the planet's apex rulers. Chapter 228, The Hunt for the Monkey King, Bambina's True Form. It's not a problem. The 8 kings may hold a high status. But that doesn't mean they're immortal. If one dies, a new king will soon rise to take its place. Jiro was indifferent. He didn't share Ichiryo's philosophy. In his view, this world operated on pure survival of the fittest. Even an 8 king could be killed if you had enough power. And as it turned out, both he and Yuki had exactly that kind of strength. Taking down the Monkey King wouldn't be a problem. Besides, they weren't going after the Wolf King Guinness. If they were targeting Guinness, Jiro would have intervened. After all, Guinness had raised him from childhood. Sure, wolf packs lived by survival of the fittest, but he had no intention of watching his adoptive father get slaughtered. In that case, it's settled. We'll go directly to the 7th continent and take out the Monkey King Bambina, Yuki said, cutting the discussion short. He wanted to gather the remaining ingredients as quickly as possible, then continue his own research projects and wait for God to be born. Then let's go. The idea of taking down one of the 8 kings actually excited Jiro. Don't forget, his old nickname was Jiro the Rampaging Beast. The guy was ridiculously strong and had a hell of a temper to match. Deep down, Jiro was still a savage, bloodthirsty fighter at heart. Centuries of experience had mellowed him out, but that violent streak never really disappeared. So, the idea of killing an 8 king naturally piqued his interest. Just like that, after saying their goodbyes, the two of them used the back channel to travel to the 7th continent once again. The native inhabitants of the 7th continent were screwed from the start. Mixing with those damn monkeys was always going to end badly. Honestly, Yuki had nothing but contempt for them. They'd taken a perfectly decent continent and turned it into a complete shitshow, while the Monkey King couldn't be bothered to give a damn about managing anything. To be fair, the Monkey King wasn't entirely at fault. As a ruler, his only real responsibility was keeping external threats away from the seventh continent. Day-to-day governance? That wasn't in his job description. So he delegated everything to his underlings. And those monkeys had completely lost control. The moment they got a taste of authority, they started wreaking havoc, leaving countless weaker creatures in constant starvation. They were barely clinging to life. Under normal circumstances, the monkey tribe would never have faced such hunger. But the high-ranking monkeys at the top were calling the shots, and everyone else had no choice but to fall in line. In Yuki's eyes, these monkeys had zero administrative ability. Look at the Whale King Moon. He didn't micromanage either, leaving everything to the seven beasts. But did the sixth continent turn into this kind of mess? No. Only the seventh continent was this bizarre. Yuki and Jiro headed straight for the mountain where the Monkey King lived. This mountain was actually the burial site of Bambina's wife, and he'd made it his home, though not out of some morbid fascination with graveyards. The real reason was that this mountain had once been a goldmine of rare ingredients. To honor his wife's memory, Bambina had not only taken her name as his own but had also transported a massive stockpile of ingredients to this location. Years of ingredient accumulation had literally formed this mountain. The gravity here was absolutely insane. Yuki estimated the peak reached about 500 times normal Earth gravity. With their mastery of advanced techniques, Yuki and Jiro deflected the 500 times gravity before it could even affect them. After all, this was external force, not generated from within their bodies, so it could be naturally redirected. At that moment, Monkey King Bambina stood on the mountaintop, staring off into the distance. He wasn't being contemplative or admiring the scenery, he was waiting for his throne rock to return. The Monkey King Bambina was very playful, so his usual recreational activities were also very special. He would break a mountain in half and then throw it like a skipping stone. This mountain would eventually circle the earth and come back, but by the time it returned, due to constant erosion, the huge mountain would have become a small pebble. This was Bambina's version of entertainment. Incidentally, this habit had spawned legends throughout the gourmet world about flying mountains streaking across the sky at incredible speeds, all thanks to the Monkey King's boredom. Of course, Bambina had other hobbies too, like playing games with his fellow monkeys. Specifically, the traditional game of Enbu. A lot of the movements and poses in Enbu looked bizarre. That's because Monkey King Bambina had simply infused his own understanding into the dance without deliberately crafting specific techniques. But once it was documented, Enbu had evolved into an incredibly powerful martial art. Sadly, Bambina's original dance partner was long gone. It really highlighted just how differently humans and monkeys perceived beauty and grace. The person Bambina had fallen for looked exactly like Zonga. In the original story, Bambina had even mistaken him for his deceased wife come back to life, which explained all that intense staring. You could say Zonga was blessed and cursed at the same time. Blessed because he always managed to slip out of trouble, and he happened to look exactly like Bambina's wife, meaning he could do whatever he wanted on the seventh continent. But the unlucky part was being mistaken for his wife by Bambina. Zonga was a man, and the Monkey King Bambina was also a male monkey. It was hard to imagine what would happen in the end. At this moment, the Monkey King spotted Yuki and Jiro. Even though they'd suppressed their auras, standing right there in the open, well, the Monkey King wasn't blind or stupid. He could see them plain as day. The moment he laid eyes on them, his face lit up with surprise and joy. He was starving for companionship. Back on the seventh continent, only his wife had ever played with him. After she died, the other monkeys were too terrified to come near him. So right now, the Monkey King was absolutely thrilled. Looks like he thinks we're here to play. Looking at Bambina's excited expression, both of them instantly knew what he was thinking. But this time, the Monkey King was in for a disappointment. Yuki and Jiro hadn't come all this way just to entertain him. Then let's play with him. After all, he won't have another chance. As Yuki spoke, a wave of killing intent erupted from him. In that instant, Bambina's playful demeanor vanished. He suddenly realized that the human before him had no intention of playing games. He wanted to kill him. If any other creature had dared to think like that, Bambina would have crushed them without a second thought. But this was different. This killing intent was so potent, so real, that it sent a shiver of genuine danger down his spine. This human had the power to kill him. The realization that a being with the ability to end his life had come here with that exact intention was something Bambina could not accept. He loved to play, but that didn't mean he was ready to die. Against an opponent this dangerous, playtime was over. In a split second, Bambina's outer skin exploded away as his 1-meter frame burst to over 3 meters tall. Even at this size, he was still the smallest of the 8 kings. But don't let that fool you. His strength was absolutely devastating. His capture level might not top the charts, but his fighting ability was off the scales. The moment Bambina revealed his true form, a powerful aura exploded across the 7th continent, and the Emperor's ring materialized in the sky once more. Every creature on the continent instantly turned its gaze toward the Monkey King's mountain. This included the Enbu Master's monkeys. They sensed that their king was getting serious. But their first instinct wasn't to rush to his aid. It was to run. Every living thing was fleeing from Bambina's location. It was the same on every continent. When one of the 8 kings got serious, there was only one rule: get the hell out. A battle between the 8 kings was not something lesser creatures could interfere in. And the 7th continent was different from the others. Bambina was notoriously violent. The second he revealed his true form, every creature on the continent knew to get the hell out of there. They understood that when their king transformed like this, the 7th continent was about to become a war zone. When the other 8 kings lost their temper, they usually just trashed the local area. But when Bambina snapped, he went on an absolute rampage. That's exactly why in the original story, the other monkeys had bolted the moment Bambina transformed. They knew that sticking around was a death sentence. Battles between the 8 kings could easily devastate entire continents. Jiro's fight with the Horse King was proof enough. The 8th continent had almost been ripped apart. He may be a playful brat, but he's still one of the 8 kings. He reacted instantly. Go ahead. This time, Jiro had no intention of stepping in. He knew the monkey didn't stand a chance against Yuki. After consuming 2 legendary ingredients, Yuki was already equal to the 8 kings. Now, with a third under his belt, his power had skyrocketed to an entirely different league. Bambina was completely outclassed. This fight was Yuki's alone. Chapter 229, Slaying the Monkey King, Pair. Bambina had already taken a peculiar stance. Yuki recognized it immediately, the opening posture of Enbu. When Bambina got serious, this was how he began. Enbu, huh? Let's see if you can deflect my power. Yuki threw a punch, a simple, brutal explosion of raw power. He wanted to see if Bambina could truly negate his strength. After all, he had now completely surpassed him. Boom! As the punch flew, Bambina's expression soured. He could feel the overwhelming power behind it, but dodging was impossible. Yuki's fist had locked onto him. His only option was to meet it head-on with Enbu. In an instant, Bambina's hands, one high and one low, met Yuki's fist. Yuki felt a powerful, spiraling force. Bambina was trying to weaken and deflect the blow. But Yuki's strength was now far greater than his. While Enbu was still effective, it wasn't enough. A small portion of the force was redirected, but the vast majority remained. Bambina took the hit head-on, and even for someone like him, the damage was brutal. A massive hole was blasted clean through his torso. But he didn't back down. Instead, he went on the offensive, charging up a sphere of calorie energy in his mouth and launching it straight at Yuki. This roar-like attack was one of Bambina's signature moves. In the original story, he had used it to blast a blue nitro from the 7th continent all the way to the 1st. When the blast reached Yuki, he simply rotated his hands, using the same technique Bambina had just attempted. The energy was instantly redirected, sent flying harmlessly into space. Whoosh! Bambina couldn't deflect Yuki's attack, but Yuki could easily deflect his. It wasn't just a difference in raw power, it was a difference in mastery. Yuki's control had grown, surpassing even Bambina's in the very art he had created. His greatest strength had been turned against him and utterly crushed. Bambina now knew he was no match for his opponent. But he didn't run. If it had been Joao or one of the Blue Nitro, they would have fled at the first sign of being outmatched. But Bambina wouldn't. None of the 8 kings would. Even knowing they would die, they would not retreat. They were the 8 kings. Their honor, their responsibility, their will as kings, these things were more important than life itself. Death was scary, but for them, there were things far more terrifying than death. Impressive willpower. Too bad you're my target. In that case, I'll put you out of your misery with everything I've got. Yuki threw another punch. Boo! This one was different. It was infused with all his understanding of power control, and even the techniques of knocking. The punch was layered. The first layer was his absolute, raw power. The second was his mastery of control. The third was his understanding of knocking. Each layer was horrifying on its own, but together they fed off each other. The raw power amplified the technique, while the technique made the raw power even more devastating. The blow landed, and in an instant, every single cell in Bambina's body was shattered by the terrifying force. Of course, as the Monkey King, Bambina was also a prime ingredient. So, Yuki didn't obliterate him completely. He had only killed him, leaving the body intact. The moment Bambina died, Yuki saw Per vanish from his body. With Bambina dead, it could no longer remain attached to him. And since there were no other members of Bambina's species left, Per had no choice but to return to the Earth, back to where it all began. The era of Bambina's species had come to an end. The debt they had incurred by drinking all of Per so long ago had finally been paid. As Per disappeared, Yuki expanded his perception, quickly locating its new whereabouts. Per's original location was near the Birthcry tree, and that was where it had returned, forming a great river once more. The amount of Per was absolutely massive. It had barely been harvested over the years and just kept building up, creating this incredible stockpile. Now it flowed like a river, making collection ridiculously easy. And the best part? No processing needed, you could drink it straight. Yuki and Jiro quickly made their way to the river of Per. Yuki collected a vast amount, but even so, the river continued to flow endlessly. Per has finally returned to the Earth. So, do you want to be the king of the 7th continent? As the one who defeated Bambina, you have the right. Jiro asked with a smile. Why would I want to be a king? I have better things to do. Yuki rolled his eyes. Humans lived in the human world, but they also existed in the gourmet world, on every continent except the Area Zero. But over the long years, many human populations had disappeared. Just like on the 7th continent, the original inhabitants were completely gone, their settlements abandoned. As a member of this planet, a human could naturally become one of the 8 kings. But Yuki had no intention of doing so. While there were no rules restricting him, being one of the 8 kings came with responsibilities. It meant taking on the duty of protecting the continent. But why would he want to be some so-called king? He could hunt down any ingredient he wanted on his own, he didn't need an entire continent's resources backing him. He had his own strength. When you possessed absolute power, authority was just empty words. That sounds like you. Now that we have Per, what's our next target? Jiro asked. Let's go ahead and capture the rest of the ingredients. But before that, there's one more thing I need to do. With that, Yuki disappeared on the spot. In the blink of an eye, he returned, holding 2 people in his hands. HM? Aren't these members of Ichi's Biotope Zero?
If I remember correctly, that should be Giman and Malay.
Jiro was a bit surprised to see the two people Yuki was carrying. They were the gourmet gang leader, Giman, and the reviver, Malay. Giman was the one who had taught Sunny in the original story, and also the guardian of one of the three entrances to the gourmet world from the human world, the three-way road.
As for the reviver Malay, Yuki also knew him.
His skills as a reviver were very strong, and he was considered in the top tier. In the original story, these two had been seriously injured on the seventh continent.
With no means of treatment, Malay had used a special knocking technique to put them both into a state of suspended animation, waiting for rescue.
It was a desperate gamble.
This suspended animation was basically a coma. If no one reversed the knocking, they'd eventually die. But Malay had been out of options at the time.
Yuki remembered that these two were still in stasis, so he'd rescued them along the way.
That's right, it's them. They're in a state of suspended animation from knocking. Let's get them back on their feet.
With that, Yuki moved to release the knocking on both men. The moment he did, their near-death bodies, which had been held in perfect stasis, began to deteriorate at an alarming rate. But before the damage could become irreversible, Yuki infused them with a wave of his life energy, instantly stabilizing their conditions and healing their wounds.
We're alive. Thank you so much, Chef Yuki, Master Jiro. Though Yuki hadn't spent much time with them personally, everyone in Biotope Zero knew his file inside and out. Realizing that Yuki had just pulled them back from the brink of death, both Giman and Malay were overcome with a profound sense of gratitude. Don't mention it.
It was nothing, Yuki said with a casual smile. He held a certain respect for members of Biotope Zero. Sure, they all had their own reasons for being in the gourmet world, but they were still doing their job, keeping the world in balance. If powerful ingredients ended up in the hands of Gourmet Corp or NEO, there was no telling what kind of hell would break loose. Besides, Giman had stood as a lone guardian at the gateway between the human and gourmet worlds, single-handedly preventing the beasts from the three-way road from pouring into the human world. A man like that deserved to be saved. It might have been nothing to you, Chef, but you saved our lives. If you ever need anything from me, anything at all, just say the word.
Giman said with deep sincerity, his voice heavy with emotion.
He knew damn well that he and Malay couldn't hold a candle to monsters like Yuki and Jiro. They just watched Yuki demolish the Monkey King with their own eyes. Yuki's power left him absolutely speechless. There was no way he could ever truly repay such a debt. They didn't need his help capturing ingredients or fighting their battles. The most he could do was offer his unwavering loyalty, a promise to assist with any small matters they might need handled. Yuki accepted their gratitude graciously. A life debt wasn't something that could be settled with a simple thank you, and he appreciated the sincerity of the offer. But for now, he didn't need anything from them.
Chapter 230. The taste of modified pear, tens of millions of flowers, the voice of earth.
After saving the two men, Yuki turned his full attention to the river of pear flowing before them.
He wanted to see if his ki could alter its fundamental properties. He had reached the level of a god chef, and while he knew there was still a long road ahead, he had hit a temporary plateau in his growth. This was the perfect opportunity to experiment. If he could modify it, great. If not, he'd just have to wait and try again when he was stronger. The research didn't take long. Yuki quickly isolated the gender-swapping property among pear's many characteristics. Now, all he had to do was eliminate it. As Yuki began to channel his ki, a strange, powerful aura enveloped him. His power, having grown continuously over his journey, was now a force to be reckoned with. He entered a peculiar, hyper-focused state, his entire being dedicated to the task at hand. This sudden shift in his presence immediately drew the attention of Jiro, Giman, and Malay. What's happening to him?
Giman couldn't help but ask, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and awe as he watched Yuki's bizarre transformation.
I have no idea. Jiro admitted, shaking his head.
The kid's got a ridiculous number of abilities.
If I had to guess, he's doing something to pear. What exactly, I couldn't tell you.
The sheer number of tricks Yuki had up his sleeve was the biggest impression he'd gotten from their time together.
Is this going to be a problem? Malay added, a hint of concern in his voice. Don't worry, Jiro reassured them.
His skills and power are top tier.
But the most important thing is his mindset. He doesn't do things by halves. If he's not absolutely sure he can succeed, he won't even try. Jiro knew Yuki better than most. He never took unnecessary risks. You could tell just by how he'd stubbornly stayed in the human world long after his power level had surpassed 100, refusing to enter the gourmet world until he was completely prepared. And even then, he had dragged Jiro along as backup. In Yuki's own words, he was terrified of dying. Jiro didn't see that as a flaw. Aside from old-timers like them who had lived for centuries and seen it all, who in this world wasn't afraid of death? It was a natural human instinct. Because he was afraid of dying, Yuki never did anything he wasn't absolutely certain about, especially when it came to his safety. He would never expose himself to danger unless he had no other choice. Given a choice, Yuki was the type to prepare for every possible contingency. Soon, Yuki's state returned to normal, his ki now depleted to less than a tenth of its capacity. But it had been worth it. Pear was a powerful ingredient, but his newly evolved ki had been enough to modify it. He had successfully removed the gender-swapping property from the large pot of pear in his hands. Chef Yuki, what were you just doing? Giman and the others asked, their curiosity piqued now that he was back to normal. I was modifying pear, Yuki explained, looking at the liquid in his hands. Drinking it causes a gender change. I just removed that property. The gender-swapping effect was truly something he couldn't accept. But thankfully, he had dealt with it. At least the portion in his hands was now safe to drink. You can modify an ingredient like pear? Hearing this, it wasn't just Giman and Malay who were stunned. Even Jiro's eyes went wide with disbelief. For other chefs, just being able to prepare these ingredients was a monumental achievement. But Yuki had just altered one at its fundamental level. What kind of overpowered ability was that? I only modified it a little. And even that took almost all the power I had, Yuki said, shaking his head. The amount of ki required depended on two things, the quantity of the ingredient and the significance of the property being changed. More of the ingredient meant more ki. A more fundamental property also meant a greater expenditure of ki. The amount he had just modified was enough for a few dozen people to have a taste. And the gender-swapping property wasn't exactly a core characteristic of pear. If he had tried to alter its ability to see souls, he would have needed several times more ki, and it still might not have been enough. Even a little is horrifying enough, Jiro and the others said, shaking their heads. They had never heard of anyone who could modify an ingredient. Anyway, let's not talk about this. Let's try some pear. Now that the gender-swapping issue was resolved, Yuki was eager to consume it. After all, it would boost his strength. He estimated that after eating this, even if all the 8 kings ganged up on him, they probably wouldn't be able to do a thing. Yuki wasn't about to eat alone. Besides Jiro, Giman and Malay also got a bowl. The two were filled with emotion. They had come here to fight the Gourmet Corp, never dreaming they would capture pear, let alone eat it. But now, not only were their lives saved, but they had a bowl of the legendary ingredient right in front of them. After thanking him again, they all began to drink. The taste was, of course, incredible. After drinking pear, their gourmet cells were activated once again. Yuki and Jiro had now consumed 4 of the legendary ingredients. 4 more to go, 3 of which were currently attainable. Gentlemen, this is where we part ways. Yuki said after they had finished. We still have other ingredients to capture, so we can't escort you back to the human world. He planned to capture all the remaining ingredients in one go. As for delivering them, there was no rush. There was still some time before the gourmet solar eclipse. And their capture speed was in a different league from Toriko and the others. Toriko's group needed to prepare extensively after arriving on a new continent.
After finding Komatsu, they had spent a long time in the gourmet world, collecting a large number of ingredients to send back to the human world. Yuki and Jiro were much faster. They arrived, they captured their target with overwhelming force, and they left. Even if an 8 king stood in their way, it was just another fight. They had already fought the Horse King and the Monkey King. The Monkey King was dead, and the Horse King had called a truce. They weren't afraid of these dangers, so they didn't need any time to prepare. Giman and Malaya could now return to the human world on their own. Though the 7th continent was a dangerous place, their strength had increased significantly. As long as they weren't incredibly unlucky, they would be fine. Yuki and Jiro, on the other hand, used the back channel to travel directly to the 4th continent, the domain of the Snake King. With a length of 220,000 kilometers, it was the largest creature on Earth long enough to encircle the entire planet. Its body, though only 2,500 meters in diameter, was a terrifying sight. But they had no intention of bothering the Snake King. Instead, they headed straight for the Cave of Old Age. The cave's time-distorting effects were useless against them. They could simply open their mobile kitchens, creating a pocket of normal time around them, and the accelerated time flow wouldn't be able to touch them. They found Yasaku within the cave, living among the continent's native human population. They had developed methods to resist the aging effect, and the cave served as a natural sanctuary for them, as the beasts of the continent dared not enter. Yasaku was overjoyed to see them. He had successfully regenerated Earth's flower fields, allowing the legendary ingredient to grow, but he had no idea how to capture or prepare it. Now that Yuki and Jiro had arrived, his long watch was finally over. As soon as Earth was harvested, he would be free to leave. After a brief stay with the natives, who were incredibly welcoming thanks to Yasaku sharing some of his reviver knowledge with them, the group headed to the flower fields. These fields were a network of roots that stretched across the entire planet, funneling all their nutrients here to form the single fruit of Earth. The flowers themselves were a one-time bloom. After producing Earth, the fields would need to be regenerated before they could grow it again. The moment he arrived, Yuki heard its voice. The key was the nectar of the flowers. Each of the tens of millions of flowers was a special preparation ingredient, and each required a different, unique cooking method. Only by preparing every single one, collecting their nectar, and drizzling the boiled-down concoction over the fruit of Earth could the preparation be complete. It was a task worthy of one of the 8 legendary ingredients. For any other chef, facing tens of millions of special preparation ingredients would be a nightmare, a task so daunting it would drive them to despair. But for Yuki, who could hear the voice of the ingredients and possessed unparalleled skill, it was just another challenge. That wraps up this part of What If Fishing System in Food Wars World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.